So, as is traditional in Australia, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which I'm making this call from, the Ngunnawal people and the Ngambie people. Their elders, past and present, sorry. And I invite everybody on the call, if you wish to let us know who are the First Nations people and the lands from which you're calling in the chat. Welcome everybody to the Sensitive Species Data Extension Task Group working session. You'll see that I've actually crossed out sensitive species at the top, and that's because over our time working on this particular topic, we've agreed as a group that we actually think that restricted access species is a better way of describing what we're going to be talking about this evening. So what we were intending to do was basically just do a quick background for those who are unfamiliar with the topic on what sensitive or restricted access species are, what they aren't, give you a bit of a background on as to what the task group's been working on, and then that'll be Tanya and I, and then Simon and Mieke are going to talk about where we're up to in terms of developing vocabs and solutions for both the Darwin Core data package and Darwin Core native. So, sensitive species. So sensitive species data are basically data about species that have features that for some reason a data custodian wants to withhold the data from public view or modify the data before it's public. And I'll go into a bit more about that in a moment. As I've already said, we're tending to use the definition of restricted access species data, and that's because the use of the word sensitive tends to cause people to cling to their data like Gollum in Lord of the Rings and not actually think about this particular topic rationally. And most of what the task group has been talking about is how we can go about protecting the importance of this kind of sensitive data or restricted access data, but still allow the data to be accessible in some form to people who need to see it, so researchers, decision makers, and the like. And just so to give a practical example of what that looks like, what I've got here is a map out of the Atlas of Living Australia. On the right-hand side of the screen, what you can see is the state of Victoria, where for this particular species, the data is very typically randomly distributed across the landscape. But over the state border in South Australia, this is a sensitive species, restricted access species, and the data has been generalised to a 10-kilometre grid, and that's very obvious. Another feature of sensitive species and restricted access species data is that it tends to vary depending on the data custodian you're talking to or the administration that you're dealing with. So, and from now on, I'm going to talk about RASD, so restricted access species data, and not use the word sensitive terribly much. So the first big misconception that we often strike in dealing with this topic is a lot of people, particularly members of the general public, are astounded to learn that not all threatened species are restricted access species. And I think there's a good reason for thinking about the definition of RASD as being a shrink-wrapped definition, because the more it's shrink-wrapped around the species that actually need this kind of protection, the more we're able to share data on everything else. So sensitive species might be rare, common, species whose appearance, management, value, habits, its cultural significance, or its invasiveness make their locality sensitive. Threatened species are species that are listed as threatened under legislation. You can have a really common species that is RASD, And you can also have a threatened species that there's no logical reason why you would want to make it RASD. A classic example would be a threatened species who's distributed continent-wide. It's very difficult to predict where it occurs within those areas. It's not amenable to poaching. So there's no earthly reason to actually make it restricted access data, because knowing the points does not actually add any additional threat to the status of that species. So what are RASD reasons? I'm not going to go through all of them, but what we're trying to do here is give some idea of the breadth of things that this working group's been, the task group has been looking at. So we're dealing with everything from species that are of biosecurity concern, because species that don't occur in a country, but the border intercept records where they've been intercepted by quarantine, those records are really important within the biosecurity community. But if the records get out as point locations in a country where that species is not found because they've been seized at the border, it could have implications for trade and agriculture and that kind of thing. So it's a classic example of a species record that's not sensitive for conservation reasons, it's sensitive for economic reasons. Other examples include you may wish to temporarily treat species records as RASD because they're associated with a PhD that you're working on. But it's equally important that after that PhD is published, if possible, those records are shared with the broader research community in some way. So reasons that records might not be restricted access species data. There's no earthly point making a species RASD or species records RASD if the data is publicly available. So we quite often in Australia get requests to make a species restricted access species, and because it's a highly localized endemic species. Yet you can go to the scientific paper where the species was described and get the locality of the species. Now that paper is publicly available. There's no point in hiding the points. You should look for other solutions to that conservation conundrum. I've already covered the idea of low risk life histories in the previous slide, and also the concept that a species can be difficult to find. But a classic example would be in Australia a thing called the hip pocket frog, which occurs in very unusual locations, is extremely difficult to find, and it only occurs from under rock scree slopes. So you're never going to find one unless you're very lucky. And of course, low risk of poaching is another reason why a species might not be RASD. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Tanya. Thanks, Tanya.
Thanks. I'll get you to change the slides.
No problem.
So Cam and I and peers actually were part of a national task working group that developed a framework for restricted access species data in Australia. From that, we and in discussions with other people in other countries and people like Will in Finland, we found that the issue wasn't handled consistently across the globe. GBIF also commissioned a report looking at different countries and how they handle and classify sensitive species, or RASD. So we became aware that there was potentially a need to develop a way of a standard way of handling them and classifying them. So we, Cam and I and Piers and Andrew held a workshop at Tadwig, the Tadwig conference in 2023, and we got agreements from participants at the conference that we looked to set up a task group and develop a Darwin core extension based on what Arthur Chapman had documented in his report back in 2020. And there was a number of different amendments proposed for that during that workshop. So for now, we have, so the conveners of that, it's officially Cam, but peers, Andrew and I also help out. And membership so far, we've got representatives from government, universities, data providers and data aggregators, a lot of them from Australia, but also from a bunch of other countries over around the world. Next slide. So we set up the task group in 2024. It was task group under the Darwin Core Maintenance Group. And we've had around 11 meetings so far, as well as we set up, once we got the vocabularies sort of into a near final state, and we set up vocabularies for sensitive reasons and treatments. We set up 2 subgroups to work in more detail on those and looking at the data schemas for both Darwin Core Native and the data package. So we've had an extra 4 meetings on those to develop the data models, and now we're at the stage where we are drafting documentation to go to the Darwin Core Maintenance Group for review. Next slide. The vocabularies that we've come up with can be applied in a one-to-many relationship. So a restricted access species may be restricted for a variety of reasons, and then the treatments that you apply to the data for that species may be one or more as well. So it's kind of similar to the measurement of fact Darwin Core extension. A treatment does need a reason to be associated with it. But as I said, there's one or more reasons or treatments that may be applied to a single species or a record. We have subcategories. We came up with broad overarching categories, but we made sure that we put subcategories so that there was more detail available to both the data custodians and users as to what the reasons were for generalising or obfuscating a record, and understanding how it had been generalised in some way. Because at the moment, Darwin Core basically just has 2 fields with limited flexibility and no standard vocabularies for how you can fill them out. Next. So the 6 categories or reasons for applying restrictions to the data are these. So it's personal information and privacy. So that's a top level category. And under that, there's a couple of other different, more specific categories that fall under that. And the same goes for all the rest. So the sensitive location, which includes things like threatened populations, potential exposure to the locality of a sensitive species picked up in a survey amongst other more common or non-sensitive species, whether that species potentially on a property might lead to people trying to either trespass onto a property, or things like species attractive to hunting might mean that there's potential harm to people from shooters coming in illegally. There's also biosecurity risk, which Cam mentioned before. So there might be trade sensitive species or invasive species that haven't yet been recorded in an area. Species attributes are things like, next one's
Sorry.
species attributes may be either physical attributes of the species, which might make it sensitive, and also if there's taxonomic uncertainty. Usage restrictions are things like if there's legal contracts in place around sharing or passing on the data, or if they're also non-legal agreements. So there may be things like an embargo on a data set where someone is yet to publish but don't want their data shared prior to publication. And then the last one's First Nations cultural significance. We haven't gone into as much detail with this, but we've put it, just come up with some categories. So there might be culturally significant species. There might be something culturally significant about the information about a species, or a species might be lead to people identifying culturally significant locations. Next. Similarly, the treatments, we've come up with 4 main categories of treatments. And then there's sort of subcategories beneath those. For example, obfuscating coordinates. So you can either truncate them, you can replace them by a grid, randomize them within a polygon, or maybe replace them by a centroid of a region. Generalizing attributes can be any attribute. So that can be locality, it can be any attribute thing within a Darwin core archive that might be lead to or disclose some sensitive information about a species. And then you can also generalize attributes at a taxon level. Then there's dates, so you can generalize to months, year, or decade, and then withholding data. So whether you withhold a whole data set, records, attributes, embargo it. You can embargo records or attributes, or withhold the whole entire data set.
Thanks, Tanya. Simon and Mieke, over to you.
Thanks, Cam. All right, so this slide here is just to show that that lovely information on the vocabularies that Tanya's just shared. We have the code to back that up with definitions and a vocabulary that's implementable potentially in with all the other GBIF vocabularies that are heavily used in Darwin Core. So we're prized, ready to submit that to the committee. Next slide, please, Ken. And now I want to move a bit more into the sort of implementation of how to use the extension within the 2 types of Darwin Core. There's the Darwin Core native, or is also shown with if you're submitting data to GBIF in that kind of style, there's the Darwin Core archive, and then also the Darwin Core data package, which is currently under review. So you see with the Darwin Core native with the star schema, you've got like a core in the middle, and then other higher class nodes that point towards the core. The treatment would be in a similar kind of vein to one of those outer edges of the star pointing into the core. And when it comes to the data package, then also that would be in a similar vein in that the treatment is its own kind of class and would be joined to other classes using join tables. Now we're going to have a look at some more of that coming down the line. We have the schema in code as well, ready to describe all the fields. And I'm going to show you on the next slide what that looks like briefly. We're not going to show you all the fields because included in all the field options for the Darwin Core data package includes a lot of the IRIs and the links to the vocabulary as a whole concept scheme. But what you can see here from the fields that we're implementing into the extension is the treatments have a treatment ID. They have the treated field. So this is the sort of the target of what is getting treated. So this might be things like decimal latitude, decimal longitude, if you're obfuscating a location, or it might be an attribute field or something like that. And when there is no, sorry, when a record is being withheld, then this treatment would be, sorry, treatment field would be blank because there's sort of one field that's being targeted. The treatment reason, this is where we would be using those phrases from the vocabulary and also the treatment type. So that's the actual implementation of the treatment. We've also got a treatment description field. So this can extend beyond what the vocabulary has and give that ability to have more nuance if that's required. Then where there are times where a particular treatment is only valid for a particular time frame, we've got option for a start date and an end date to encapsulate when the treatment is valid. And also a link to the treatment organization. So who was the organization that requested this treatment to be performed on the data? And so this is an organization that could be contactable if someone wants to get access to the full data set. And then we've got another field called treatment in effect. And this field allows you to sort of differentiate between if this treatment is the one that is being enacted upon in the data that you see, or whether this is another treatment that has been applied to the same data and then also might need to be taken into consideration when looking at access to the full data set. All right, so from there, Cam, what have we got on the next slide? All right, so when looking at implementing into the Darwin Core data package, did speak before that the treatment is applied to a core entity via a join table. So you can see in the middle that we've got this core dash treatment. So in that core dash treatment join table, it's just the two identifiers of what you're treating and the treatment itself. And then of course with the treatment, you'll have external links to the treatment reason and the treatment type into those vocabularies that will be published somewhere, hopefully GBIF. Next slide, please, Ken. All right. Oh, we're up to implementation already in the case studies. Simon, did you want to talk a bit about the Darwin Core native first?
I think so. I think one of the things that we were going to do is possibly stop at this point because we are halfway through.
Yeah.
And
All right.
just see if there's questions. I mean, just very briefly, the Darwin Core, traditional Darwin Core model with a star would be, if you remember the table that Mieke initially talked about with the various fields. Think about it as being that with indeed the core, whatever the core ID that those treatments are associated with. So we just thought at this point, if there's questions, it might be a good chance to ask those questions about going into RASD in more detail, or particularly what we've done, and then we could move in, or if there aren't any questions at this point, we can move into some example case studies, which hopefully will illuminate why we've gone with certain approaches and why certain fields are there.
I hope there's some questions, and I'm really disappointed that I missed out the death cap mushroom discussion that's been happening in the chat, because that's endlessly amusing for any Australian around the planet. It's probably in bad taste. Jutta.
Yeah, I had been wondering because you had like this very small category of hazardous to humans, what the reasons might be. Yeah. And it's interesting that it's always context specific. And that is also the question I would like to ask now is once talked to a colleague from South Africa, and they said, okay, we we have a species that is highly threatened. We can kind of restrict access to this species. But then when people are really, well, how was it? So kind of like what they said, well, we have the problem that we restrict information to this species, but people can go and, for example, um, okay, yeah, they removed the geographic information from a threatened species. And then
Yep.
they said, well, we found out that people actually go to the date, see where the collector has been during that day, because his collections or their collections were in our herbarium. And then they figured out where the threatened species would be. So I was wondering what your thoughts about this kind of extended context where people can, yeah, it's easy if you think about one specimen or one species, but what about if you can infer information from the context?
Um, Great example, can I just say? So Simon and Mieke, did you want to talk about the cave example? Because I think it actually deals with a range of those kind of issues and how the proposed extension would work.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
So, okay. So the other cave example. Sorry, I was just reading the second example. So one of the examples that we've got, Cam, have you got the slide to bring
Yeah,
up?
possibly. That depends on how
Um,
competent I am.
is a couple of things, and it is a really good question because it covers a range of issues, and to a certain degree, one of the things to remember with this, what we're talking about is describing the treatment. So it's not actually saying, hey, in the scenario where you've got a location, you should do this, 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 and this to these fields. That's sort of up to the person implementing the data. There is a bigger discussion about that because, for example, if I bring up, so in this case, we're talking about a new, I think, Cam, if you leave it like that, it's
Yeah.
hopefully large enough for people to see. A new cave being discovered as part of a survey. In that cave, a well-known species of spider is found that lives in a cave. I'm not going to pronounce the actual word on YouTube. Several new species of mites and an extremely rare subfossil of a extinct species. So in that case, where we have a history of people using biodiversity databases to find caves, steal fossils, and damage the habitat, there are the three issues to consider. One is the cave locality is sensitive. There's nothing significant from from a RASD point of view in terms of the spiders, but the fact that it dwells in caves means that it indicates, hey, here's a cave. So that's that associated bit of detail, and the fossil is a restricted access species because of the nature of fossils and fossil hunters. And in this case, the new species of mites is sensitive or wants to be restricted access because it's a new species and it's currently part of a PhD project. So that would be the situation where you'd actually have multiple treatments. You'd both have, for the reasons, you'd have multiple treatments, as well as all of those species being affected by different reasons for the treatment. So we don't have that data in that slide. So what I
No,
would say is,
I'll bring up the spreadsheet while you're talking, if that's okay.
yeah, you did. That'll be fine. So people will have to deal with my Excel spreadsheet. This is looking at it from the Darwin Core archive version, which we were going to say we were going to talk about the package first, weren't we, Mieke?
Oh,
How we
yeah, I
do that?
can do the package first. I can share.
Yeah. Do you want to?
No,
Oh,
yep, no, go.
Yep.
We're a well-oiled machine.
We are. Let's go with this. And where's presenter mode here? That turning it into. Did I do the thing? Yes, can you see it?
Yes, all
Yes,
good.
awesome. Oh, okay, cool. So with that example, we've got 3 different species to talk about. We've got spiders, we've got the mites, and the cave fossil, which we're calling a diprotodon. And yeah, very exciting stuff. I've got here with the way that I've kind of displayed this is there would be 3 class tables. There's the event, the occurrence, and the treatment. But I've split out the treatments into different blocks just to make it a bit easier to digest each one, and it's not a big table. And it's too big for a presentation screen like this. So I've got it like this for now. So with Darwin Core data package, the location of things is attached to the event as opposed to the occurrence, which you're probably more likely to see with the Darwin Core native. So where we've got issues is, we've got this cave location, and we've also got potentially sensitive information that leads someone to realize that, oh, this is a cave species. Say, for example, here, this occurrence remark that says it's troglofauna. That makes you think, oh, this is a cave spider, without me even knowing that this is a cave spider. So 2 different styles of treatments that we've gone for in this example, where there's the obfuscation of the latitude and longitude. So here's that join table that takes the event to 2 treatments. These have been split up because it's 2 different fields that we're applying a treatment to. One is the decimal latitude and one is the decimal longitude. We've got the treatment reason of this is a, oh, wait a minute, that's not the physical attribute. I've made an error there. This is supposed to say there's the, what is it, Simon? Inference by survey information or something.
Sorry, just double checking.
I copied the wrong one.
This is spider. Potential harm to people or property, I think is what we ended up with for that one. Or was it?
Oh.
Yes.
Why did we have that one?
Being the potential harm is, in this case, to the cave.
Falling in the cave.
To the environment. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we've got a link to the vocabulary and the description, and it generalized to 10 kilometers. There's an organization, the State Department of Environment, and the treatment effect is true because this has been truncated. Then also, in order to reduce the making it obvious that this is a troglofauna species, we can withhold this attribute. So this treatment is, there's the physical attribute that we're removing, and we can have that A attribute withheld type of treatment. And I've got here the treatment description is the occurrence remarks. So that's just the spider. Then we can look at the new species of mites, which also would have their coordinates obfuscated as well, because being in the same location as the cave, then you'd want to obfuscate those. But with this particular mite situation that we've got going on, just in this example, which is not quite related to what you were talking about, Yuta, but in this case study, we have the mites that are new species, and the authors of the new species information want to embargo their information until it's ready for publication. So we've got a reason in that case as a non-legal reason and the treatment type is an embargoed record. And they've embargoed it for 1 year. So we can use the start date and end date on that one. And this is for a different organization to the other one. But both of these treatments are in effect. They're affecting different parts of the data. And then we've got the fossil, which again, we are obfuscating the location. But here, I actually remembered to put the right one in. I managed to update this one, where we've got exposure via survey information. That because this is at the same event as the other species, the same location, that means that you'd be able to infer where this amazing diprotodon fossil is if you wanted to go collect more fossils. So we have to obfuscate in that regard. And the other thing is there's another example here, which I didn't fully get to finish, was the obfuscated this as well. Yeah, we just put an obfuscation on this. But if it was a fossil of a diprotodon, I think we should withhold it. But it's not my job because I am not the people making the claims as to how restrictive we want to put these treatments. But in this case, we've got two different organizations. Sorry, no, the same organization with two different reasons. One is that it's a highly restricted species, and one is exposure via survey information. But it's doing the same treatment. So I think in this case, the most restricted kind of restriction wins, which would be, in this case, let's say, the highly restricted species. Simon, did you want to talk about that? Any
Yeah.
other
So
detail?
I'll jump in.
Do you want me to
So
take this down?
Yeah, see if I can share a window here.
Yeah.
Let's see how we go.
Okay.
Does
Stop
this
sharing.
work?
There we go.
Right. Let me see if this works. Share this window. Oh, no, not that window. The technical competence on display is, oh, no, it hasn't shared. That's good. Allow to share a window. And share this window. Is that showing? Sorry, I have to switch
Yes.
between.
Well done.
Oh, cool. Brilliant. Oh, I can't actually see that in the display window. I've got to go and look in the PowerPoint. Right. So this is a Darwin Core extension example. The ones that we're talking about here are the sort of 2, 3, and 4, as I've got the details. You can see here with these are the mites. So it's a bit more constrained than Miike's examples with all the details. But here we have those environments, that idea coming through that you have, say, a digital latitude and longitude, but you could also have the occurrence remarks and they would be withheld. But in this case, we're talking about the treatments, how it's been generalized to 10 kilometers and who's responsible. So in this example with the Darwin Core archive, for the record for the mites, which was say occurrence ID 3, which would be a blank, which would end up being a blank record in the core with the occurrence ID and no other information. That is there as it's embargoed, that between those dates for that university, but it's clear and the information is here. And one of the reasons this information is added is to say, okay, if we just said the record was embargoed, you can wait until that data's come out, but it's also wanting to be able to say all of the treatments or the types of treatments that should be applied to this data so that people can either make decisions about who they need to speak to get the data, the details that they would like. And so in this case, these are marked as, the only one that's marked as in effect is at this stage is the University of Victoria, the request to embargo the record. So in this case, these are effectively different reasons for making treatments to the same record. And you could say, look, why would we just put in the treatment that has actually been applied? One of the reasons we're putting this forward as a concept is so that people not only have an idea of what has been done to the data, but potentially what could be done to the data if they were to get permission. So rather than going, oh, I'll get permission from the University of Victoria to get the exact details, they would then go, oh, now I've got to go to the Department of Environment to get permission. So it's giving people an idea of what they would have to deal with in those examples. And I'm going to, so just being aware of time, does that sort of cover, it gives a bit of an example of how we would do the data, but can I stop sharing? Have I stopped sharing now?
Yes.
Yep.
It's confusing,
good.
isn't it?
It's rather confusing, sort of using this, sorry, for the web interface. So it is that example of, this is about telling or explaining when you give a data set to people what has been done to the data so that they can evaluate how they can use that data or whether it's sufficient, whether they need more information. It doesn't necessarily give guidance to how things should be treated or which fields should be treated in when you're dealing with a RASD species, because yes, if you want to generalize the location, you do look at the latitude, the longitude, the locality, occurrence remarks. Those sort of details may need to be generalized or obscured to fully protect a species. I'll stop talking there and just see if we have any other questions.
Can I just follow on a little bit from there, Simon, in that I think something to get across is that while the extension allows for describing what has been done to the data, it doesn't force anyone to choose anything specific, but it offers a lot of flexibility and options to describe lots of things that someone might want to do. And it's all up to each individual jurisdiction to still do what they need to do. Yeah, there's no hard and fast rules.
Thanks, Mieke. Thanks, Simon, for the explanation. Any other thoughts or comments from anyone? Oh,
I
that's
would
an awkward
have
silence.
another one.
Go for it.
Sorry.
No, not at all.
It's a topic I'm interested in. So I was wondering, are you in contact with the RDA Sensitive Data Interest Group? Because I signed up to it and I received their emails and I'm not active in the group, but I get, for example, their emails about webinars and so on. And they do some really exciting work. It's mostly from the medical perspective.
Yeah.
So it's a bit different, and also they are kind of like a decade ahead of us. But I find it really interesting to get an idea of how you tackle this really difficult context, what Simon and Mieke, you just showed, where a lot of aspects come into play. And so I was wondering if you are in some kind of contact with them.
So Tanya and I were participating in RDA discussion groups when we were developing the Australian framework. so as you say, they're doing some very exciting things, and it's a bit disconcerting to be in a meeting with them when they're talking about creating a safe working environment that's cost millions of dollars to develop because they're in health and they can afford it. But yeah, no, we have been in contact with them. I can't say that we've been in more recent contact with them because we had several, I suppose, discussions between the what the health sector was doing, which is very much focused on creating a safe environment where data can be shared, but not downloaded. And certainly in Australia, there are currently some trials happening in the biodiversity space. In fact, peers on the call and Mieke, the Gaia Resources company's been a leading light in this space. But yeah, no, we haven't, I suppose, had a regular dialogue with RDA just because they're so different. They're so far advanced of what most people in the biodiversity space are doing.
Thanks. But you're very aware about what is going on and the different aspects. So that's really great to hear.
Cam, there's a question in the chat, which is from Franziska Schuster. She asks, the use cases shown appear to require a very labor-intensive and customized data curation process. Have there been any discussions about how to apply them to large data sets, for example, using a decision tree?
I'll pause in a moment to let everybody else comment. I think it's important to we've shown the examples that we've shown specifically because what we've been trying to test is the ability of the extension to handle convoluted circumstances, which members of the task group have actually encountered when dealing with RASD. But I suppose, at least from the Atlas of Living Australia's perspective, one of the things that we've had a mind to in being part of this task group is how we would implement it as a major data aggregator dealing with 180 million records. And we're pretty confident that in most instances and realistically, what you're going to end up in the vast majority of cases is a single treatment and reason process where you're going to be generalizing a particular record based on, for example, a list of restricted access species that a database came up with. The treatment is likely to be one of several different types of truncation of latitude and longitudes, for example, and then the removal of specified fields. What the extension allows you to do is to make that meet fair principles by being able to describe within your data set the reason for withholding that record in a logical way with much more flexibility than what's currently available in Darwin Core. Simon, Mieke, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I think
Tanya?
yeah, you've nailed it, Cam. But when it comes to the examples we've showed have a lot of complexity. But what I think you would tend to see when you're doing a lot of data aggregation is that the same treatments turn up a lot because, the same kind of data providers are doing the same kinds of treatments for the same, like you've got one treatment and it can be applied to many, 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 many records. So where the the depth is in the join table. So there's lots and lots of joins, but the actual size of your treatment table might not be that overwhelming. And yeah, your records are the number of records you've got, which not everything is going to need a treatment because a lot of stuff is open access. So while it looks really potentially quite complicated with the examples that we've shown, what I think you'd see in real life would only be a small subset compared to the massive data that you have with all the other stuff going on. Does that, I hope,
Yep.
make it not feel so overwhelming?
And I think it is that difference between this is describing what has happened. We're not sort of dealing with the how the decisions are made, but just generally from the experience, because Cam Tanya and I tend to work on the restricted access species as they come into the atlas, and we do have that sort of straightforward approach that when you have a generalization, so we have a location generalization, you're not only changing the latitude and longitude, so we've just, we've limited the number of fields that we've put into those records, or for the examples, just to try and keep things onto one screen. But we will have those processes where it's like, okay, it's defined that this restriction affects, generalizes the latitude and longitude to the grid, but you need to then it also removes occurrence remarks and these restrictions. And for some species, it may be that you add more detail in for those details, but generally we just have a set of fields that we generalize for those details. There is a question about the information withheld existing term, and did the group evaluate the use of that existing term? I think that's an earlier part of the process than I was involved in, but
yeah.
Cam?
So yeah, we did, and the reason why we chose not to use that existing term along with the other one, data generalizations, is that it's hard to show and search on multiple terms within multiple values within each of those fields within Darwin Core. So it's hard to, it's not as transparent, and you're limited with space of what you can put in there and what you can describe as being done to a record. Whereas this is aiming to make it a bit more transparent, and you can apply multiple treatments. At the moment, that's only a one-to-one relationship, where we were looking for a one-to-many relationship.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Simon.
There's another question as well. Oh, do you want me to?
Yeah, there's
sorry.
Well, there's three other
more
questions. I just wanted to check with Ben. Is it okay if we go slightly over time? Because I'm noting that we're kind of only a couple of minutes from the end.
Ben did notice that his Zoom had frozen and he wasn't touching anything.
And he says yes.
Oh, he said yes.
Oh,
right.
okay.
And he actually was asked. He's asked one of the questions, so he probably keen to hear the answer.
Okay. I think that was the question he asked. So the next question was, how is local sensitivity handled relative to global sensitivity? So again, this gets into that breakup between reason and treatment. What we've tried to do is there's actually different classes within reason for different levels of sensitivity, and there's also scope within the treatment classes to look at different levels of treatment, because obviously a species can be locally RASDs because the population is sensitive within, say, a council / local government area versus something that's globally significant. The framework tries to account for both types of RASD behaviour.
And I just put a link to the GBIF report that I mentioned earlier on, where Andrew commissioned this report, which looked at the global applications and made some recommendations around that. And it basically said that regional lists of RASD species make more sense rather than using, because a lot of the other countries were using IUCN Red List for their sensitive species list and applying that. And as Cam said, some of those species are only sensitive, or they're only threatened in one country, and they're actually have a different context. They might be invasive in another. So regional lists are recommended, and that's kind of what we use in Australia. Because we're a big continent, we have 8 lists that we apply to each jurisdiction. So that's how we handle sensitivity within different areas.
Did I see Andrew stick his hand up at one point? Andrew, did you want to say something?
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, it's just responding to that information withheld comment. So as part of that report, we did look at the information withheld and how it was used within GBIF. What we found was that it was inconsistently used. So people weren't either providing information in that field, or the data that was put in hadn't been standardized as well. So it was just in terms of actual usage, it wasn't being used as I think it was originally intended to be used. And I guess Tanya, put that link into the report there as well, which is a useful background document where we also talked about these global sensitive lists, things like IUCN Red lists, CITES lists, things that you could potentially use, but then ultimately it seemed like national and sort of more regional level lists were better for using, but relatively sensitive generalization, data generalization around.
And Shelley's put an example in the chat too. She's saying, following on from this, that within the herbarium community where they share duplicates locally or globally, sorry, they're going to work out how they use RASD locally and share that data globally. So to ensure that data is actually actioned in other systems.
Nice.
Yeah,
well, given that
I was just going to follow on from that. We in the herbarium community have been going, well, we'll just let ALA and ABH deal with some of this stuff. We won't do it locally because it's too hard. But if we think about it, we're actually going to have to locally think about how we implement some of this, because we can't rely on ALA because we're delivering data to other places. And so if we're delivering data to AVH and it's got this big flag on it saying don't share this data, but then we send it off to Q and Q just puts it up in the system, we're stuffed. Then we might as well not bother.
Well, do you want to know something really terrifying, Shelley? So there was a species recently made sensitive in a jurisdiction that I won't name, and all the records were generalized. And I went, wonder what AI does with this. So I bunged the species name into Google Gemini and said, "Hi, I'd like to know, could you give me a list of the exact coordinates for this species?" And it very dutifully went away and mined its system and gave me a really nice list of everything where the species occurred, regardless of the fact that it had all been generalized. So, there's some challenges in the near future, which we're going to have to come up with a solution to as well. Interestingly, though, I also tried to break the label generalization that Melbourne University Herbarium's been doing. I tried breaking that with a couple of different AI tools, and I got chastised by all of the AI tools. The label had been deliberately generalized, and they wouldn't assist me ungeneralizing it, which I thought was equally interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Cool.
even ChatGPT wasn't prepared to take a punt at it, which I thought was quite like. And it wasn't that it couldn't do it; it was saying it wasn't appropriate because it had been blurred out for a reason, which I thought was quite
ChatGPT has a
interesting.
punch. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got a legal
intrigued.
body behind it. Sorry.
No, I'm just wondering now whether it was just recognizing that there was a blur rather than, and that just is what it generally will do for an image now. Because if you think
I
about
didn't test
what
that.
else you would generally, pardon?
I didn't test that.
What do you would generally blur in an image if we think about how they've, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, true.
But,
anyway,
I mean that, sorry, go on, okay.
I was just going to say we have gone more than slightly over time. I just wanted to see if there were any other questions or comments.
Concerns?
I'm going to say on the basis that I can't see anything in chat, that's a no. And look, really appreciate everybody turning up at various times of the morning, evening, nighttime, and every other point in the day. It's really great to have so many people interested in this topic because I think it's a really big challenge for all of us now and into the future. And thank you very much, and particularly thank you to Simon and Mieke and Tanya and Piers and Andrew for being intensively involved in the process. Thank you all.
Thanks, Cam.
Thank you. Thanks, Cam.
Thank you, guys. And I'm just really glad that the meeting didn't crash. This is good.
And thank you to you too, Ben.
I have two computers in here, and I literally switched computers, and like just seamlessly, just like it wouldn't crash. But there's a moment there where I had chat on my phone, just like bouncing back and forth. But thank you guys. That was really interesting. I really appreciate you guys doing this and talking about this important subject. And thanks for answering my questions too.
Thanks, Ben.
No.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Well, good morning, good night. Good luck.
See you later.
See ya.
See ya.
Bye.